Let's talk about truck dancing, yet another way to play on your skateboard that doesn't involve standing on the grip. And with a naming system even more complex with the trick itself. There are truck stands, often called a 50-50, sometimes even a truck stand 50-50. There are handed ones, and there are also no-handed ones. I've even seen them called 50-50 Caspers in Japan. There are pogos that involve jumping up and down on the truck, and then there is a slew of switch-footed and inside-outside footed tricks. There are specific tricks like the saran wrap. So to be transparent, I cannot accurately name all of these. I will do my best, but feel free to comment more accurate names and maybe even the location that you call them that, because I do feel that around the globe, different communities refer to this trick slightly differently, but I'll definitely pin the corrected names so that we can build a slightly better understanding of what to call these tricks. And that's why I chose to name this video Different Ways to Truck Dance, because at the end of the day, that is what we're doing here. And like all categories of freestyle tricks, there seems to be endless combinations that we can come up with. So I wanted to take some time and share some of the tips that took me from my standard, basic, handed 50-50 up to slightly more difficult versions like switching feet and removing my hands entirely. In short, truck tricks have really confusing names, and this is what I've learned so far working on them over the last 4 years.
Probably my first tip is to get yourself a bit of finger tape. You can use sports tape. I have some of that works pretty well. There's also just this little Nexicare 3M, I think it's medical tape. Medical tape works really well. If you want to have like a deep, good handed pogo session or any type of truck dancing session, and you don't want to rip your fingers up, you don't want to be bleeding all over the place, and don't want your fingers to feel weird for the next week while the little cuts and scrapes heal, then I recommend you pick up some finger tape, and that will help you get through a hard truck stand session a lot easier.
Before we get into the technical tips, I've also found that slightly rougher ground can be a lot more forgiving for truck tricks, whereas slicker surfaces can slide out or slip out more easily. So when I have the choice, I tend to use rougher ground if I know I want to work on a combination that involves a truck trick, particularly a more advanced one. Because there are some tricks that I won't even try unless I have grippier ground, because knowing that I have the possibility of slipping out just takes away all of my confidence. And the butter flip is a good example of that. To get a couple of the basic tips out of the way, I don't really have the board parallel to me when I do these tricks. I often have it at about like between a 15 to 30, maybe 45-degree angle depending on what I'm doing. But the board is not parallel to my shoulders. It is at an angle, and that just helps me bring the board up without it getting caught on my knee or something. Next, I try to keep my body weight pretty centered. I keep my head above the ball of my foot for the foot that's pinning the board into the ground, and I really try to keep my body weight there throughout the trick. So the board is moving, but my body weight is really staying in the same place. And I find that when my body weight moves, I tend to mess the trick up. So that's one thing I've really been focusing on recently, is trying to keep my body weight centered and in the same spot while doing the trick, instead of allowing myself to jump forward or backwards and really throwing my body weight out of line. Like, I don't really want forward or backward momentum. I really want my body to stay in the same spot, and I want to move the board around me. Next, when it comes to your basic truck stand, I really think of it as stepping up onto the board or hopping up onto the board and not jumping. So I don't want a giant leap. I just want to really gently move my body up and just kind of step up onto the truck. It's a really light motion, and if you really try to jump into it, it's gonna be harder. Those are my first 3 kind of general tips when it comes to working on any kind of truck trick.
My favorite 2 tips for pogos is actually hand placement and kind of intensity. So when it comes to the hand placement, I like to take my top hand, doesn't really matter, I just want it gripping the nose, And then my backhand has a lot more specific hand placement. I like to put kind of the meat of my palm on the edge of the wheel here, just like that. And then wrap my fingers along the grip side of the board and place my thumb on the top of the graphic. I tend to not put grip tape along the side here so that I have at least just a little room that's not going to be ripped up by pogos, and that's typically how I pogo. As far as the intensity goes, I like to pogo very gently. I find that the harder I'm smashing my tail into the ground, typically the harder it is for me to actually do any type of pogo or jumping, truck dancing maneuver that I'm sort of working my way into, but I try to think gentle and that helps me a lot.
My next tip is for if you're learning how to pull up into truck. I find that looking at the nose and not just your feet really is really helpful. Spot the nose for that catch. Don't stare at your feet. I made the mistake of staring at my feet, I think because I got into the habit of doing so. But recently, now that I'm really trying to focus on looking at the nose when I pull up into truck stand, I found it's helped my consistency just about double. It's a lot easier to watch the nose come up and catch it than to look at your foot while you do the trick. Also, try to catch the trick high. I find it a lot easier to catch high and adjust than to try to catch it too low, because if you catch it too low, the board's going to be really heavy when it hits your hand and most likely just slip out or pull down. So I tend to actually just put my hand out in advance and try to bring the board up to it.
When it comes to no-handed truck stands, what kind of helps what I'm thinking about is trying to get the board to be up more vertically than it is down low. Because I find that when the board's really tilted low, that's obviously when you have to fight against it the most. So trying to catch the board up nice and high and keeping it up more vertical than horizontal will help a lot while you're balancing there. But then also, I've noticed that like my favorite no-handed truck dancers, someone like Yuta Fuji, their front foot, when they catch the nose, is up really high. They're typically right under the nose, and my foot still gets stuck along the bolts very often, or sometimes even lower if I have a really bad catch. But I've got that in the back of my mind. Like, the best truck dancers, in my opinion, no-handed truck stand dancers, their feet are up really high, they're catching the nose of the board, and that's where I want to be catching. Which is why today I'm really heavily focusing on that, trying to keep the board up more vertically, trying to get my foot up as high as I can to the nose. And then also, I've come into like the bad habit of putting my foot sideways on the truck, which you can see in a lot of my recent clips. And I want to get my foot more parallel to the board so that I can work on more advanced variations, like trying to get into rail from truck stand and trying to flip out, or just do other things that involve using my back foot to rotate the board. So trying to fix that bad habit from being straight on to sideways. That's one of my goals for today.
And there's a bit of a theme here for truck dancing for me, between being gentle, trying to catch things high, but then also just slowing down and taking your time. I find that the more I rush through this trick, the more mistakes I make. And I truly mean this. Like, when I take a deep breath, calm down, and remind myself not to rush, I tend to do these tricks better. It's way too easy to just push the board over really fast and slap it into the ground by accident. Then just slowly, as slow as you can, just kind of like pull the board up and grab it, or pull the board up and catch it, whatever you're doing. Try not to rush through the trick. Try to take your time and really control the board throughout its path, and I found that to be incredibly helpful.
There's also just a lot to be explored when you're going into truck dancing. I think it can be really intimidating because, in my opinion, truck stands and pogos and these types of tricks, especially pogo, like, it's very much like a manual where you kind of just have to chip away at it again and again and again over time. At least that was my experience. It wasn't like a finger flip. I think I got other tricks like finger flips or Caspers. Not easier, but definitely you kind of get the full trick. Whereas with the pogo, I kind of got like one hop. And then I was trying to get 2 hops, and I was trying to get 3 hops. And to me, that's a lot like working on manuals where I can manual for 1 second, and now I can do it for 2 seconds, and now I can do it for 3 seconds. So it's kind of working up over time and then being able to branch out into other kind of truck dancing maneuvers. Like I've been working on the inside, outside, flip down. Coming into it with that mindset will be really helpful though.
But like once you get that momentum going, then you start to learn things quicker. Just like once you start to get a decent manual, I feel like the first 5 seconds are really, really tough. But then after that, you start to see faster growth. At least that was my experience. It might not be your experience, but hopefully something in here can help you with your truck dancing or give you something that you want to try. I definitely enjoyed making this video. I want to get better at truck stands. I want to get better at truck tricks, but they're definitely manuals to me. They're going to take a while. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe I'll see you next time.